Welcome in to the Autzen Audibles podcast. Matt Preem, Eric Scopel on the show as always. And today we welcome in Jeremy Werner, Illini Inquirer. It's hard for me to say. Still used to Big Ten teams. It feels weird. This is a Big Ten matchup. It's a Big Ten ranked matchup. Illinois coming across the country, number 20 in the country, to take on the Oregon Ducks, who's previously number 1. That's still strange to say as well. But Jeremy, Brett Bielema enters year 4 as head coach this season. This version is probably the truest version of his vision when he was hired back in 2021. What's become his imprint on the program and what they want to be and known to be week in, game in, season in, out?
Well, he's brought competency, Matt, which is something Illinois did not have for a very, very long time. And it's consistent competitiveness and competency. Those are the words I use to anybody when I come on shows like this every week. Is Illinois was one of the worst Power 4 programs in the country before he arrived. The 2010s were a really down decade. The end of Ron Zook era was okay. They made some bowl games, but they really underachieved, and that's why he got fired. Then they hired Tim Beckman, who was an abject disaster, was 4-20 in the Big Ten play, and was really embarrassing off the field, including an abuse scandal, which he got fired over. Then they had an interim coach for a year, Bill Cubitt, who I thought did a solid job, but just it was not befitting a Big Ten program to do that. And then Lovie Smith came in here and gave Illinois some credibility and stability that they really needed, but he just was not a college coach, guys. He was the guy at the end of his career. Just thought he was Lovie Smith and he could succeed. So just did not have a great staff around him and just did not have a great game plan for winning in the Big Ten. So Josh Whitman, the Illinois athletic director, has been phenomenal here. He's missed on some hires like Lovie Smith, but he went and got a guy who's done it before and got a guy who's been a part of builds that Illinois needs to mirror. Brett Bielema went to Iowa under Hayden Fry. Iowa is what Illinois should aspire to be, which is just consistently good, making bowl games, eventually, potentially good years in that college football playoff conversation. He coached under Bill Snyder at Kansas State. Bill Snyder turned Kansas State from a nothing to a very, very good program. He obviously went to Wisconsin, or Barry Alvarez, which when Barry Alvarez went to Wisconsin, they were terrible. Yeah. And now they're a big brand in the Big Ten. And Bielema led them to 3 straight Big Ten championships when the Big Ten was down, with Ohio State and Penn State dealing with scandals. And then he goes and coaches at Arkansas, doesn't go very well. I think he learned a lot from that. But then he went and learned from Bill Belichick in the NFL. So I just think Illinois is getting a really good version of Bielema. And he's building this the way Wisconsin and Iowa did. These programs that are bad for a while, and then they get better, and slowly all of a sudden it's like, hey, they're just kind of good. And they hang around in games, and they really don't beat themselves all that much. Illinois just gets into close games, guys, and they find a way to win more than they used to. Illinois used to get blown out because they were out-talented everywhere. They don't have the most talent in the world, but they do have some NFL guys under Brett Bielema. He develops the most out of his players, and they're just usually, outside of last year, pretty well coached. So it's just a solid program right now, and I think that's really helped them climb the ladder from one of the worst programs in the Big Ten to now. I think you could definitely say a middle tier program, which is a huge leap for the Illini. And they're obviously hoping that this year, at least, that they can be more than a middle program.
Jeremy, you kind of touched it there in terms of the ascending nature of Illinois right now. And this seems rather sustainable kind of big picture too. I do a story for Duck Territory each week, looking at the opposing teams, like 10 highest rated recruits. And I was struck by how many of those guys are 2023 and 2024 guys. I think it was 6 or 7 out of the 10. So walk us through the recruiting under Brett there and why that's been an uptick. And just in terms of, I don't expect you to run through all the good young players on the roster, but just give us a sense of like why it feels like this can be a team that's good right now, top 20 team right now, but also going forward can kind of maintain this.
Well, some of the guys you're talking about, like a Malik Elzy is a 4-star player that doesn't even play a ton yet on this team. Colin Dixon's their slot receiver was a big recruiting win for them. But yeah, they're just gradually upping it. They're not getting a bunch of 4-stars, but I've always been one that, hey, top 700 prospects in football are basically 4 stars to me, because the top 120 in basketball are 4 stars. So if you did the math, like top 700, we just like to base things on the NFL draft. So basically the top 250 are 4 stars. But Illinois is getting more of those players, the top 1,000 prospects. Guys, the number 700 prospect in the country under some previous staffs was like some of the best recruits Illinois got.
Sure.
Now they're getting guys, a lot of them, 200 to 600. So they're getting more of those guys, but they're just developing and getting a lot more of those top 1,000 guys, which are good Power 4 prospects. They're just winning a lot more Power 4 battles over Wisconsin, Iowa. They're not winning all of them, but they're winning more of those than they ever did before this. And then they're getting a couple top-rated guys, but where they've really hit recently, guys, and really upped is the transfer portal.
Mm-hmm.
They got Tommy DeVito a couple of years ago. It was a big get for them to kind of stabilize their quarterback position for a year. They got 8 wins, kind of a breakthrough season 2 years ago. And then they've recruited off of that, getting some of those better recruiting wins off of what they did 2 years ago and some of their high NFL draft picks. But this offseason, they really upped it. I mean, 2 years ago, they get Luke Altmaier. He's one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten right now. They developed him really well. But he's a former 4-star prospect that just got beat out by Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. Like, that's not a bad thing because Jackson Dart's pretty good. But this season, they went and got J.C. Davis, who's a 4-star offensive tackle. Melvin Priestley has been a big surprise at right tackle for them. Dennis Briggs Jr. is a really good player at Florida State. They're able to get him. Terrence Brooks was one of the biggest gets from Texas, a 4-star transfer out of there. He started all 13 games for a college football playoff team last year. He doesn't even start on this team. But Zachary Franklin is an all Big Ten caliber kind of wideout, probably get a chance at the next level. So They really upped their NIL. It's not Oregon territory at all, but it is probably middle of the pack, Big Ten. That's what Brett Bielema said here recently. And it's really helped them get some players and get some instant impact players to kind of round out their roster and really give them some of the best players on the team. So it's been gradual, but it has been noticeable for sure.
Let's go back to last week. Michigan came to Memorial Stadium. Sounds like it was close to a sellout or it was. Yeah. A huge number of recruits were on campus, and then they win. Why was that such a big moment? We both watched Brett's press conference. We were both amazed at like how long he talked and what he said about.
Yeah, I heard Dan Lanning doesn't talk that long.
No, he does not. He does not talk a lot.
Jeremy, just one thing. Brett's opening statement was longer than Dan's entire press conference yesterday. Just a heads up.
I was just walking out of the Illinois press conference, and some of the equipment guys were loading the truck, and they said they're looking forward to having you guys on my pod because they didn't learn much from Dan Lanning because it only lasted about 5-6 months.
Let's go back to last week. Why was it such a big moment? It's I know Michigan is down, but it's still Michigan, and it's a program that I look back and like Illinois in the last 20 years has won like 3 or 4 times in the 20 matchups. Why was this such a big moment? Not just the win, but just what it means for where this program's going.
So much went into this, guys. I don't think it's singularly the best win of the Brett Bielema era. They went to Penn State his first year and upset the number 7 team in the country. They had a huge win at Wisconsin a couple years ago. They've had some really exciting comeback wins during his time, but it was a culmination of a lot of things. Number one, it was Illinois asked to get Michigan on the schedule this year.
Really?
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. The defending national champion. But 100 years ago last week was Red Grange's historic performance, kind of changed football in America when he had 6 touchdowns, 4 in the first 12 minutes. Guys, this is the first time people ran for 60, 80-yard touchdowns. He just excited everybody. But that was one of the biggest moments in college football history, and they had the 100-year anniversary of that. It was the first game in Memorial Stadium here too. So they've kind of had this year-long thing about it. So it felt like this was a game that could be it. Michigan was going through so much change, and you had 2 ranked teams here. It was the first ranked game here, guys, which says a lot about Illinois since 2000. CBS was here. First game CBS had been here since 1983. And you hadn't beat Michigan since 2009. So for all those reasons, it was a big moment for this program. It was kind of a field rush after this, but it was mostly just a culmination of, Illinois is good. Like they're a good program now. And I think people felt that because you beat Kansas here when Kansas was ranked. Kansas has not ended up being very good. They're 2-4. You went on the road and beat Nebraska prime time Friday night. That's still a good win, in my opinion, even though Indiana smoked them last week. I still think Nebraska's a bowl team, a good team. So to beat the defending national champion that's got all these NFL draft picks on it, it's a big moment for the program, huge for recruiting for them. And I just think it just said Illinois is legit because this is now 2 years in a row, 2 out of 3 years, guys. But Illinois is on the trajectory of being a top 5, top 6 Big Ten team. It doesn't happen often around here. So to do it 2 out of 3 years, and the other 2 years you had 5 wins and had a lot of close losses, I just think it says that this is a stable, solid to good program for Illinois.
Let's get into the pass game a little bit, Jeremy. Matt's going to ask a question about Luke Altmaier, kind of dive into him, but I'm really curious about the combination of outside receivers with Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. Franklin's somebody that Oregon's fairly familiar with because he was at UTSA where Will Stein was, and there was thought maybe Oregon would get involved there, but that combination's been very productive for Luke, and for obvious reasons, just with the size and ability to win on the outside. But can you just walk us through what that combination kind of presents for a defense and what's made them so tough?
Yeah, it's a combination that really complements each other. Pat is a third-year starter now. As a freshman, he got playing time because he was just a blocker. Then he started and showed some pass-catching ability. Last year, he was pretty good alongside 2 guys who are in the NFL now. Isaiah Williams is an all-Big Ten slot receiver. He's on the Detroit Lions right now. And Casey Washington was a 6th-round draft pick, really kind of like Pat. But Pat's 6'3", 200 pounds, physical, great blocker. He's probably the best blocking wide receiver I've seen in quite some time here. But he's just a guy that if he gets in one-on-one and the ball is up in the air, it's probably more likely 70-30, 80-20 in his favor because he's just a good athlete, strong, senior, team captain, just a really, really good player that I think is going to get drafted. I think he's going to be a middle-round draft pick, and maybe he's got a higher ceiling than that, but just really one of the better wide receivers in the Big Ten. Then Zachary Franklin, they got in the transfer portal, didn't work out for him at Ole Miss. He got injured. And then Ole Miss just has a bunch of great wide receivers. So you get injured, you get kind of lost in the mix. And he decided to redshirt so he can have another year. Barry Loney Jr. was his offensive coordinator at UTSA for 2 years before Will Stein was. And they had a lot of success. He's the NCAA's active career receiving yards, receptions leader. So he's just a veteran. He's not the biggest guy, 6'1", 190, I think they list him at. He's not the fastest guy. I don't know if he'd run a 4.4 or anything like that. But he's just that savvy guy who gets open. He just runs routes like a pro. They go to him a lot underneath, while Pat Bryant's kind of their deep target. So the challenge of those two is there's 2 of them, right? Like a lot of teams might only have one of those guys that the quarterback trusts implicitly to go win a one-on-one battle. Luke Altmaier has 2 of them. So that's the challenge is if you go bracket one guy, the other guy's in single coverage, that's usually a matchup advantage. Of course, an Oregon team is different when you got Jabbar Muhammad and some of these players. But for Illinois, I think it's one of the better duos of wide receivers in the Big Ten, especially when you get outside the Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. Well, I think even Penn State, they got a better duo then. But once you get outside of that top tier, I think this is one of the better wide receiver duos in the Big Ten.
It obviously helps a quarterback to have really good receivers, and that's going to help your stats. But we'd be doing a disservice to Luke as well. Altmaier, the starting quarterback for Illinois, if we just said, oh, well, he's got better receivers, so that makes him really good. That's why. Why 15-1 touchdown to interception ratio? That's really good. 1,500 yards passing. He's completing 66% of his throws this season. This is his 2nd year in the system now as a starter. What has led to this development? Why has he become so good? Because he was solid last year, but I don't know if you could say like he's probably in the top third of the conference QBs like he is this season.
Yeah, I think 24/7 Sports had him like number 16 or 17 coming into the season. And we just thought that was nuts because last year he went through a lot of growing pains. And if you looked at the stats, you saw 10 interceptions there, and we're like, oh, that's not good. Like he's not that good, and he plays for Illinois, so we're going to rank him low. But he had 7 interceptions his first 3 games. He went through a lot of growing pains. Penn State was one of the first games he played, and they demolished him. He tried to make too many plays downfield and got picked off 4 times in that game and got benched for the final quarter. But after that, he proved himself to be a Big Ten playmaker. He had like a 65 completion rate, 10-3 touchdown interception ratio. And the one thing about Luke is kind of goes underrated is his running ability. Which has been huge. He can make plays on the run. He can prolong plays, and he can beat you with his running ability because the last 2 weeks, if you take out sacks, he's their leading rusher. So he's a guy that is a dual threat for sure. But you mentioned it, Matt. It's his 2nd year as a starter, and he wasn't beaten down by the growing pains. He learned from it, and now he's seen everything. So now he knows when I can throw downfield and when I should throw downfield. He got a little conservative late in the season because of that Penn State game, but now he does trust his receivers because he's got 2 of them. So he's not afraid to just put the ball up and let those guys go get it, but he's really accurate. He's a really smart player, and he and Barry Lunny Jr., the offensive coordinator at Illinois, now just know each other, right? They know what he's good at, know what he's not great at. But he's one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. I think Dylan Gabriel obviously is number one right now, but if we're making a top five, I think it's Luke, because he can beat you in multiple ways. He's accurate. He's got a big arm. He's got good people around him with the wide receivers and two tackles that protect him really well. So he's what gives Illinois some hope, right? Like, I don't think any Illinois fans are thinking, oh, yes, we're definitely beating Oregon going this week. But when you have a good quarterback, you can win games. And Luke did it last week against Michigan. He only threw for 80 yards. He missed some throws, guys, but his running ability, his poise, he played control. He knew he didn't have to go win the game by himself with his arm. Those are things a veteran quarterback does. So when you have one like that, it gives you a chance. And right now, Illinois has one that gives them a chance to beat some good teams.
I was really high on Caden Fagan going into the season. Thought he was going to be really good. And then I just love really big running backs, and he's absolutely massive. He's out for the year now. Starting running back, what's the impact? Who steps in his place? And, I won't say they've struggled, but they also really haven't been elite at running the football either this season. What's with the run game?
Yeah, Caden Fagan's one of the most talented players, so to lose him is not help them at all. It does hurt. He kind of struggled early in the year because he seemed like he was trying to do too much rather than just be 6'3", 250 and explosive and try to run through some tackles at the line of scrimmage. Looked like he was trying to make too many big plays, but he was coming on his last two games and then suffers a hip injury during practice during the off week. And you hate it for the kid because it's his second season-ending injury, but he's one of the four-star guys that Eric was talking about earlier, one of their best recruiting wins of the Bielema era. So losing him hurts. They do have two solid veterans around him that complement each other well. Josh McCray looked like, as a freshman, he was going to be their bell cow back, 6'1", 240. If you watched Wisconsin back in Bielema's day, they had P.J. Hill and guys like that were just these big backs that kind of wore you down late in games. But McCray's their best blocker. He's their best receiver, and he gets some tough runs in the middle. He's their most decisive runner. Then Aiden Lawfrey had one of his best games last week against Michigan. Had two runs over 10 yards, including a 29-yarder early in the game. He's their speed back that can also, catch the ball. He's a better blocker. Then they got four-star kid, freshman, Khalil Valentine, who's really quick, really fast. But he's not playing very much right now because he's not a good blocker and he's slight and he's not going to get through some tackles. So McCray and Lawfrey are solid. I wouldn't say they're great. They're not going to go win a game by themselves. But the running game was great against Michigan in part. They ran for more yards against Michigan than any team the last 2 years, which was a big surprise because Illinois did not run the football very well leading into that game. But the Illinois offensive line played well. But most importantly, Luke Altmaier is a huge part of this rushing attack. They do some zone reads. He can scramble. They call it designed runs for him. So the last 2 weeks, he has 15 carries for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's a big part of what they do running the ball.
It's a little off script, but do the Illini feel a little snake bit at running back with injuries? Because I know I was looking at McCray. That's the guy who missed 22 and 23 because of season enders. Fegan was last year and this year. I mean, that's rough.
Last year, all 5 of their scholarship running backs missed at least 3 games due to injury, so they felt really snake bit last year. You always feel like you're going to lose one running back. It's just a position that takes a toll. Lawfrey's been hurt for most of his career. You mentioned it. McCray's basically lost 2 seasons due to injuries, but they feel pretty good right now that they at least have their top 4 guys because last year at this point, they had to move some walk-ons from defensive back to running back just to be their backup, because they only had 1 or 2 guys that were really healthy. So, they probably feel snake bit the last couple of years, but they do feel like McCray and Lawfrey give them enough at that position to win, especially when you feel strong at quarterback and at wide receiver.
Let's go defense for a second here. I think a couple of things really stand out. The first one being their ability to take the ball from opponents. I think 2 takeaways per game right now. They've won the turnover battle in 5 of 7, and the games they didn't win it looked like were games that it didn't really matter all that much. Walk us through kind of how they succeed there, and then maybe give us an idea of a couple of names to know there. I know, is it Yakis?
Akis, yeah.
Akis. Okay, I wasn't sure what to do with that J. I went Spanish.
Yeah.
He was just the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week with a massive 13 tackle game against Michigan.
Yeah, so Illinois' defense it was kind of built by Ryan Walters, who's now the Purdue head coach, and I don't know how much longer he will be that, but he was a phenomenal defensive coordinator here at Illinois. And then Aaron Henry got promoted, who'd never been a play caller before, but he's a really impressive young guy in his mid-30s, but he kind of really had growing pains last year, and you could tell he was a first-time play caller. But this year they've kind of gotten back to what they do well. They kind of simplified things outside of the Purdue game, where they were really exposed for it. But that's kind of the outlier right now. There's just way more experience in the secondary than they were 2 years ago. They lost Devin Witherspoon, who some Northwest fans might know pretty well with what he's doing with the Seattle Seahawks, number 5 pick. They lost Quan Martin and Sidney Brown, who were top 65 draft picks. So they had a lot of inexperience there last year, but now they have a lot of experience in that secondary. So it's not the most physically imposing or next level talent secondary, but it's a really sound, disciplined, experienced one that if you do make mistakes, they're going to take advantage of it. Their defensive front, which sometimes they do the bear front, 5-man, they're really athletic. Gabe Akis is kind of taking a star turn now. He had 2.5 sacks against Michigan with 13 tackles, a forced fumble. He's a guy they think can be an early entry NFL draft pick. Don't know how high it would be, but he's got that next level talent. Seth Coleman is an NFL player on the edge as well. T-Rod Edwards, a nose tackles, had a really good year. But they do have a weakness at linebacker. Dylan Roziek's a good Big Ten player. Not the biggest dude, not the fastest dude, but prototypical team captain linebacker, hard hitter, really reliable. But they're not the most athletic defense, which is why this matchup against Oregon is going to be very interesting because they spread you out and they got speed and they got talent at every level. The running backs and wide receivers are some of the best Illinois will see. But Illinois has done a really good job of limiting explosive. That's what their defense has basically done. Like they will bend, but they've not broken very much. I mean, Penn State had a bunch of yards against them, but only scored 21 points. And one of those was off a turnover very late in the game. So they will force turnovers. They can get pressure on the quarterback, but there are some athletic deficiencies to the defense, but it hasn't hurt them all that much this year, except for that Purdue game and maybe the Penn State game. So it's been a disciplined defense more than anything.
What's the, I guess, success of this season done for the anticipation out in Champaign for this game? I'm curious if this is a get up and go game for this fan base. Was this, I guess, going into the season, was this a game that everybody wanted to go check out? Haven't been out to Eugene, I think, since 79 or something. I can't remember. So was that 95? Okay, so I think 79 might have been Purdue. Either way, it's been a while. And so, are you expecting a big contingent in Eugene?
I don't know about big because it's such a big trip, right? But I do think Illinois fans are pretty pumped up about their program, and this is a chance to potentially see history. I think the odds are very small, given the talent discrepancy and given how good Oregon is. But it's a chance to do that. It's a chance to see a beautiful part of the country during a beautiful time of the year, to see Autzen Stadium, which they've heard so much about. So I don't know how big the contingent will be, but this is a really big fan base. This is a huge school, guys. It's a state university. It's a fan base that is getting awoken. It's a huge basketball school here. They love basketball. There's a great history of it. But Illinois football has always been talked about as this sleeping giant. And you kind of felt like Saturday with that Michigan game, starting to wake from its slumber a little bit here. So I do think it's a team that's excited. I think they know the challenge ahead of them, that Oregon is a next level program with next level talent. I think most people are looking at this like, all right, you might have a little to lose because if you win this game, you're in the college football playoff most likely. If you you might be in the Big Ten championship game if you win this game. But really, there's nothing to lose for Illinois here. No one expects them to win this game, but you have everything to gain. Right? Like everything to gain if you're able to shock the world. I mean, Illinois would be a top 10 team next week, most likely if they do this. Again, they'd be a favorite for Big Ten championship berth, all those things, because the last 4 games, schedule really lightens up. They've played 4 ranked opponents already this season, and this is the 5th one, I believe. So they've had a really tough schedule at this point, and they're still 6-1. So I think Illinois fans just look at this, hey, got nothing to lose. Oregon's the team, maybe the pressure on it. Not that they probably feel that with all the talent they have on the field, but maybe they can overlook us, and they're looking ahead to some of their other big opponents on the schedule, given that Purdue and Illinois, when we got the schedule, like I was like, Oregon, that's the game you could definitely chalk up as a loss, right? You're going there, it's a talented team. that can probably overpower you. But now you're 6-1. I think this team feels pretty confident that they can give them a run for their money, and they did against Penn State. They were within 7 points in the last 5 minutes and had a chance and just didn't execute. So if they can make it a fourth game in the fourth quarter, maybe they put some pressure on Oregon.
All right, Illinois 6-1. Like you talked about, they're in the top 20. The spread for this weekend's game is like Oregon 25, which is just really high. Eric and I both saw that last night and talked about it, and we're just kind of like, we know they're favored. We know the talent difference, but that's a high number.
Yeah.
But let's for a second just get past the Oregon game. You've talked about it a couple times. They've got Minnesota and Michigan State at home, and then they close out the season at Rutgers and then at Northwestern. 4 games that they should be favored in were very winnable games. Let's pretend now it's December 1st. How do we define success over those last 4 games? And why is this, why could this season be a turning point for the program for its future? Because it's set up where you've talked about it. Playoffs are on the table, depending on what happens this week. Big Ten championship still on the table. Like, there's still a lot of things that this program hasn't done that's still possible. How do we define success over the last half of the season?
Well, just because I know Oregon fans probably weren't paying attention then, this is the second year out of the last 3 Illinois has started 6-1. They actually started 7-1 2 years ago and had a wide open path to the Big Ten championship game. Then they lost at home to Michigan State, who was bad at that time. And then they lost at home in a basically winner goes to the Big Ten championship game to Purdue. And Purdue wasn't great that year, and Illinois was at home, so they stumbled down the stretch. They lost it was 3 straight games, 4 out of their last 5. So what could have been a 10-win season, a Big Ten championship berth, one of the best seasons in Illinois history, ended up kind of being it was good. It was a good season, but kind of left a bad taste in your mouth. So while a lot of players have moved on since then, there are some players in that program that should remember that. So it's important to continue to play well and continue to focus on what is in front of you. So after that Oregon game, I think those next 2 home games are huge. Illinois is 5-0 at home so far, but Minnesota gave Michigan a battle. Minnesota is probably going to be a bowl team. And Illinois is 3-0 under Brett Bielema against them, but that's a team that can come in here and beat you if you don't play to your standard. And I think Michigan State's a team that's got talent, and there's not a lot of talented quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Like Aiden Childs is young, but he's pretty talented. So if you have a bad day, Michigan State won last week. Like they can beat you. There's enough talent there to beat you. I just think outside of really probably the top 3 or 4 teams in the Big Ten, feels like 4 through 16, anybody can win on any given game. Yeah. So I think Illinois got to be prepared for that. Going to Rutgers won't be easy. I do think Illinois is better. I do think Northwestern they're going to beat. But yeah, like all those games, I think Illinois should win, but Illinois still isn't at the level yet that they can just sleepwalk into those games. So it's going to be a huge month for Illinois because there is a lot in front of you. I think 9 wins would be a hell of a season, guys. 8 wins, if you'd have told us before the season, I would have thought that was kind of the high end. But if you get to 10 wins, say you lose to Oregon and you win your last 4, I think there's 5 teams in the Big Ten right now with a college football playoff chance, right? Oregon, obviously. Ohio State, obviously. Penn State, clearly. Indiana has a wide open path. We'll see what happens with their quarterback out for a week or 2. But Illinois, if they get to 10 wins, they're going to be in that conversation. I think 4 Big Ten teams are going to get in, probably like 5 SEC teams. I think a 9-win good SEC team will probably get in over Illinois, but at least you can put yourself in that conversation. So if they have that, I think Illinois has a chance to really capitalize in recruiting and really take this program to another level. And guys, the most important thing with revenue sharing coming down the line, you're starting to fill the stadium. Yep. Illinois was averaging about 35,000 a couple years ago in a 60,000 person stadium. Now they're selling out games. This is the first year since 2009 they've sold out 2 games in a season. So they need that revenue to pay players. They need that revenue to keep up with the rest of the Big Ten. So getting butts in the seats is really important for them.
Let's wrap this with a question about Saturday, and this is kind of open-ended to you, but just give us the thing on each side of the ball that you think is important for Illinois to have success. It could be a matchup. It could be something that they've struggled with that you think they need to be, needs to be a strength. But give us the thing on each side of the ball you think is crucial.
Yeah, I haven't dove into the film too much. I don't know if I have to with Oregon, with the talent that they have. Defensively, you just have to limit explosive plays. You have to force Oregon into long drives. I know Dylan Gabriel doesn't make mistakes very often. I know he stresses you with his running ability, and just having a veteran like that is really difficult. And the corners got really tough matchups. The linebacker on Jordan James and those guys is going to be really tough. But I just think the key for them is limiting explosive plays, so that Oregon has the chance to turn it over. Like, you make them go 10 plays or 15 plays, right? Like, there's just more chances for a mistake, like a turnover, a penalty, and that can really hurt them. Offensively, you're just going to need your best game from Luke Altmaier. If he's going to need to play his A game, because Illinois is going to need to score some points. But the thing that really stuck out to me is, can they capitalize or kind of gain momentum from what last week was? Like, they really ran the ball well, and that was a surprise. And they were able to control that game against a Michigan defensive front. It's got Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, like two first round picks, likely Josiah Stewart. Like, they were able to kind of get back to Brett Bielema type of ball, and they're starting to play a little bit more consistent up there. So can they run the ball? Can they control the pace a little bit on offense? I'm wondering if they can do that to kind of shorten the game a little bit, to kind of keep the ball away from Dylan Gabriel in that offense. And then to get an upset, guys, you got to win the turnover battle. So if Illinois can win the turnover battle like 3-1 or 3-0, they're going to be in it in the fourth quarter and have a chance to win. But if they don't, if they turn it over, if they make the mistakes, they're going to get run out of Autzen.
He's Jeremy Werner, covers Illinois for 24/7 Sports. Jeremy, thanks for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate it. Safe travels to Eugene. We'll find you in the press box, man.
Looking forward to it. I've been to Portland before, never been to Eugene, so I'm looking forward to getting to know more of Oregon, guys.